Weird Tales Told by a Dubliner by Turlough, Conmee. Story number 11. House of Dreams. When I was a chiseler growing up in Dublin, we lived in two houses. One in Finglas, on the north side of Dublin, and one in Turlough, on the south side. To this day I dream of them both, and they belong to particular times in my young life. When I dream about the one in Finglas, I'm always a little boy, younger than 10. When I dream of the one in Turlough, I'm an older child, or a youth, and it's a different world. Sometimes I go back there as an adult on a visit. That doesn't happen much with the house in Finglas. That all seems to be over and done with. I still remember that house in Finglas in every detail, even though I haven't set foot in the place for 60 years or more. But the house and its places are a part of me. Or maybe I'm a part of it. It was a row house, or a terraced house, built in 1948 on a suburban road, which happened to be on the edge of the countryside as it was then. What a contrast between this drab row of modest suburban houses with the rough-cast exterior walls and the townland of St. Margaret's, which began at the end of the road, with its hayfields and country lanes. That was how the house looked. There was a front garden behind a low wall and a privet hedge, and a concrete path leading up to the front door with the brass number 12 on it. You went inside and you were in the hall. On the right was a flight of stairs going up to the landing. On the left was a living room with a fireplace in it. This was a room for receiving visitors more than anything else, as I remember. Then, further down the hall, was the dining room. It also had a fireplace, and the main item of furniture in it was a sturdy wooden dining table, which was also used as a writing desk for anyone who needed to write. I remember also the radio, or the wireless, as my father called it, a substantial thing encased in dark wood that sat on what must have been a low bookcase. Against the wall opposite was an equally sturdy sideboard, and at one end a chair was placed against it. When the table was not available, my sister and myself used to kneel on this chair and do our school homework or reading on that end of the sideboard. At the end of the hall was the kitchen. It was just a small kitchen. There was a back door leading out into the back garden. If you went up the stairs, on the landing you found a bathroom. Then there was a large bedroom, the parents' room, and then another large bedroom occupied by me sister. And finally, at the end of the landing, was the small bedroom which I occupied, and which looked out on Grove Road. I remember being there as a chiseler and hearing the clip-clop of horses' hooves, and looking out would see the milkman on his rounds in the early morning, his light cart drawn by a single horse, whistling as he deposited the glass milk bottles on the doorsteps. Or later in the morning, the bread van, a large four-wheeler drawn by two horses with jingling harness and blinkers, and the curly-haired baker who sat aloft on the driver's bench. Going out into the back garden, there was a concrete expanse outside the house, a sort of a patio, and two sheds, one a coal shed, the other a tool shed, which my father built with the help of a neighbour. The garden was long but fairly narrow, and there were privet hedges on either side. There was a small tree at the end of the footpath, and then the lawn extended down further to a clump of lilac bushes, and to the left there was a garden rubbish heap, where my father often made bonfires during the summer, after working in the garden. Now, Finglas is near Dublin Airport, and so as a boy I got to know the succession of viscounts, caravels, ambassadors, friendships and constellations that passed not far away coming into land. One Saturday morning in the year 1960, the new Aer Lingus Boeing 707 flew low over the house with a deafening roar, a beautiful great silver bird in the blue summer sky. Now that is the house as I remember it, and we left it when I was 10 to go and live in an older suburb on the far side of Dublin. I never entered the place again, but of course it lives on in me memory. It lives most of all in me dreams. I know when I'm back there dreaming, I'm able to unlock the whole world of me early childhood. I'm not sure if I want to, because the results are sometimes terrifying. I always dream about me parents, the ma and the da, but never about me sister. It's as if she doesn't exist at that point. Now she was 7 years older than me, so I suppose a bit remote from my life as a child. Yet when I dream about the later house in Turlough, she often plays a role. Indeed, in these dreams, we're often trying to settle down there again and make a home together. Leaving Finglas put an abrupt end to me early childhood. Everything seemed different after that. But as an adult, I dreamed of being back in the house in Finglas on the last night before we left it for good. Me mother and myself were there alone for some reason. She was down in the kitchen, and I went up to me old bedroom, perhaps to say goodbye to it. The room was completely empty, the floorboards were bare, and the wallpaper had been stripped from the walls. There were just tatters of it clinging to the plaster on all sides. Not knowing what to do, I started to pace around the empty room. It was small, so I kept turning in circles. The floorboards creaked under me feet, and me footsteps echoed around the bare walls. Then I heard me mother calling me from downstairs. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I guess she must be complaining about the noise I was making and urging me to come down and help her in the kitchen. What I'm about to describe now is the earliest dream I can remember. I dreamed it in that house on Grove Road. In the dream, I seemed to be a very little boy of about 4 or 5. But I must have been a bit older when I dreamt it, because of the realistic details, which seemed to be derived from adventure stories or the pictures. I was feeling very bewildered in this dream, because my father was missing from home, and no one would tell me where he was. Neither me mother, me older sister, nor anyone else. The da had just disappeared. There was an atmosphere of crisis about the house. That could not be denied. One morning, though, things came unexpectedly to a head. I looked in the door of the living room. There was me mother in the middle of a group of local women from the neighbourhood, all of whom I recognised. They were sitting together, talking and looking pretty grim. No one paid any attention to me, though I was standing in the doorway, looking at them wide-eyed. Then me mother stood up. She seemed to be the leader of the group, and walked determinedly up to the mantelpiece. This brick mantelpiece, which was covered in pale yellow tiles, looked to me like the altar of a church, one of them old-fashioned Tridentine altars built into the wall, with a tabernacle on top of the mensa in the middle. For some reason, there was a thing like a tabernacle on the top of that mantelpiece, in the middle. Me mother moved aside one of the tiles in the tabernacle part, and instead of the expected gilt doors of the tabernacle with the key in the lock, I saw a wooden panel with a set of buttons on it. She turned and looked back at the group of women. She seemed to be standing on the upper step of an altar, rather than on the tiled fender before the mantelpiece, looking down on the other women as if she was a priest at Mass, and saying, "Is it time?" They all nodded grimly. Without another word, she turned to the mantelpiece and pressed a few of the buttons. All of a sudden, looking out the front window of the house, I saw guided missiles being fired off from various locations on the ground nearby. I now realised that some sort of revolution had started. The local women were taken over, obviously under the leadership of my mother. I didn't see where the missiles landed, but presumably they were aimed at official government targets in Dublin. This must be a nationwide revolution, and the women of the country were taking command. I didn't understand a great deal of what happened after that, but it was clear that the revolution was successful. In the course of the following days, the army and the Gardaí came out in favour of the women, and that decided things in their favour. There was a new provisional government, and on the streets wherever you looked, there were army and Garda patrols, roadblocks and gun emplacements. I couldn't see much of me mother and me older sister, but they were around, just not paying much attention to me. One evening after dark, very much left to my own devices, I went out the kitchen door into the backyard. There was a place outside the door, across the concrete patio, where the rubbish bins were kept, and there was about 3 of them, side by side, with their metal lids on them. There was something moving behind the bins. I looked closely. There was a man hiding there, hunkered down behind the bins. He emerged from his hiding place after seeing me. It was the Da. He was wearing a sports coat and flannels, a white shirt and a tie, as he usually did when he came home from work. I went to him and we embraced. I asked, "Why are you out here, Da? Won't you come inside the house?" He warned me in a whisper to be quiet. Obviously he had taken a risk coming home. He was on the run from the new government. I understood he must have come home secretly in order to see me after his long absence. I didn't really understand what he had been doing or where he had been. I was just very glad to see him. Speaking very quietly, he said, "Let's go for a walk down to the end of the road." I fell in with this plan readily enough, though I didn't know why he wanted to go for a walk instead of just coming into the house. We went around the side of the house in the darkness and out onto Grove Road. He lit a cigarette and smoked it as we walked. Hand in hand, conversing in snatches, we went together down the road, which was quiet and dark, meeting none of the neighbours, till we got to the junction with the main Ballygall Road. Here we turned to the left, where there was some open ground and a place where a row of houses with shop fronts had been built a year or 2 previously. There, for example, was the chemist's shop, the first one in the row. We were walking along, going past it, and when I looked up at me father, he seemed to be uneasy. I saw he was watching something keenly. I followed the direction of his gaze and saw an army lorry parked at the side of the road, and some soldiers who seemed to be on guard nearby. Then, all of a sudden, there was a shout, a challenge from the soldiers. "Halt!" Me father disengaged his hand from mine and broke into a run. He had only run a short distance along the main road before a rifle shot rang out, and he fell to the ground. The soldier and other bystanders were all running towards him now. I ran too, because I could see he was injured. But as a little boy, I couldn't run as fast as the men who all converged on him. They stood around him, looking down at him, bending over him, where he lay motionless at the curb of the pavement. And as I came up to the group, I heard one of the soldiers say to the others, "It's no use, he's dead." They didn't seem to notice I was there too, looking down at me father's lifeless body. This was a dream, but it was the first I can recall from me childhood, and I've never forgotten it. It puzzled me, always. Recently, I decided to ask me sister if she knew anything that might shed light on it. She's 7 years older than me, so she's the person I'd ask if I wanted to know something about family life when I was a young child. Was there, I asked, any unusual absence in me father when I was a youngster? She replied that she had thought it was before I was born, but our father was hospitalised with a nervous breakdown sometime in the 1950s. She said the ma had told her he'd be in hospital for a few weeks. She added that he eventually came home with a wood carving of a figurine, which he'd made as part of his therapy. As a very young man, he had wanted to be an artist, it seems, but his father wouldn't let him and insisted he get a sensible job. I don't suppose the ma thought much of his artistic aspirations either. I just remembered that they often quarrelled loudly, he in his Dublin dialect and she in her Ulster Scots. The dining room table was often a verbal battlefield over the heads of us chisellers. To me, in the dream, as a young boy, his absence obviously meant that he had been dethroned and the ma had taken over. It was a women's world for a time. Men had no role to play. The da was reduced to hiding out in the backyard under cover of darkness. Nervous breakdowns were a big thing in the 1950s, this I know. People got them and were helpless. They were spirited away to asylums and God knows what happened to them. I think of electroshock therapy and frontal lobotomies. But I suppose most of them just recovered after a while. Somehow their demons had caught up with them. My ex-mother-in-law had 3 nervous breakdowns in the 1950s in Canada. She was a hard woman, probably too hard. It seems one breakdown she was driving the family car with her children in the back seat. Somehow she managed to park the car in a vacant space at the side of the street downtown. Then she collapsed across the steering wheel, unable to move, until the police found her. One cop said it was the best piece of parking he'd seen in a long time. 3 nervous breakdowns, in 1950s terms, is a sign of weakness, of course, a sign of a problem. I'm afraid I despised her because of her hardness and because of the 3 nervous breakdowns in spite of it. Only afterwards could I piece her shattered world together. She had been a young woman living in Rostock when the Russians occupied the place in the spring of 1945. She didn't escape from there till the following year when she took passage for Canada. Knowing what I now knew about the occupation of what she had always called the Russian zone, I could forgive her everything. Like I said, I dreamed often of the house in Turlough, which I lived in from the age of 10 until I left home to go to Canada. I dreamed of going back there on visits, trying even to settle there again. Rarely I would have a dream about the house on Grove Road in Finglas, and then I would always be a little boy of less than 10, like I was when I lived there. Only once I dreamed of being back in the house on Grove Road as an adult. I went there at night for some reason, and had a key to let myself in the front door. The house was empty. There was no one there. but it seemed to be occupied, the furniture in the rooms being more or less similar to what we had had there. I went upstairs to the landing where the bedrooms were, and went into my own small bedroom, the one I had occupied as a chiseller. I was not sure what to do in there. I paced about aimlessly. Then I went to the window and looked out on Grove Road. It was a winter's night and all was quiet. No automobiles, like the road was in the 1950s. There was just a solitary figure walking past. But no, the figure stopped in front of the garden gate, looking at the house. Then the gate opened and the figure walked up the garden path. I saw it was a woman. She came up to the front door, stopped, then turned and walked away. No, she was only going to the garden gate again, and then she turned and walked slowly back. It seemed she wanted to come into the house, but couldn't make up her mind to do so, or something was holding her back. Finally, in what seemed an agony of indecision, she looked up, and I saw her face. It was me mother. I recognised her features, but I also saw that she was made up as a Pierrot, her whole face painted with deathly white. She looked up towards me as I stood in the window. I couldn't tell if she could see me or knew who I was, but her face looked full of age and sorrow. Without further hesitation, I turned and walked across the landing and hurried down the stairs to open the door. But before I reached the bottom step, I heard a key turn in the lock and the door opened. The figure I had seen paused to secure the door again. Then she turned to face me as I stood at the bottom of the stairs. It was the Ma, still wearing the deathly Pierrot mask, but she looked at me now with a look of utter kindness and concern, the way she always had in her better moments. I had said nothing. "They wanted me to come," she said after a while, in the formal way of an announcement. "They're concerned about you." Who were they, I wondered, and why should they be concerned about me? She came with a message of consolation, clearly, or maybe a warning. And why was she a Pierrot? Perhaps to remind me she was dead and had come all the way from the other side. There was a light in the kitchen at the back, and the kitchen table and a pot of tea seemed to beckon as the setting for a heartfelt talk. But neither of us stirred from the spot, and neither of us said another word. I stopped dreaming about the house in Finglas altogether after that. Going there as an adult and meeting the ghost of me mother seemed to draw a line under it. Just once, a few years ago, as an older man now, lying in bed one night in me house in Switzerland, I dreamed the most terrible dream of all. In this dream, I was lying in bed at night in me bedroom in the house in Finglas. I was just a little boy again. Me mother was sleeping in the bedroom next to mine. Where was me sister? That had been her bedroom. But she didn't seem to exist. Not in this dream. It was late at night, but me father was awake and stirring, for I could hear him walking about. He was always the last one to go to bed at night. He went downstairs. Then I heard him coming up again. For some reason, I realised he had gone to get a gun. It was a revolver, a Smith & Wesson, that he had. I must have heard about them in American adventure stories. I heard him coming up the stairs, and I knew with sudden certainty that he was going to murder either me or me mother. Which one would it be? He arrived on the landing, his footsteps approached slowly, and then my door opened. So it was to be me. It was my turn to die. I saw the da in the half-light from outside, although my room was in complete darkness. He seemed a tall figure, all in black. He was wearing some kind of a cloak wrapped around him like an Arab traveller, with his head covered in a desert sandstorm, so that I couldn't see his face or his eyes. Actually, he looked like a ninja warrior in Japan, though I had only heard of those as an adult. Anyway, he walked over, and the room seemed larger than it really had been. He stood beside me bed in silence. Then he took off the black cloak, and using both arms, he draped it over me like a tent. It was like an oxygen tent in a hospital, or a screen in an old-fashioned operating theatre, and I associated it with being given an anaesthetic before one of them childhood operations I had for appendicitis or tonsillitis. Everything was pitch black, suffocating, but I knew that somewhere in that darkness he was aiming the Smith & Wesson revolver at me prior to pulling the trigger. In desperation, I reached out to grab it with both hands and protect myself. At this moment I woke up and immediately realised that it had been a dream and I was a grown man in my darkened bedroom here. But for several minutes I was quaking with fear. "This is interesting," I managed to say to myself in a detached way. "I know there's nothing to be afraid of now, but I'm still panting in terror." And so it was. I just lay there and gave myself up to the convulsive breathing, the racing heartbeat, the heaving chest, until, after a minute or so, it subsided. I've seen estate agents' photographs of the house at 12 Grove Road in recent years, and only the shell is left, plus the garden at the back. The front garden has been paved over as a place to park cars. Here was a modest petit bourgeois home, built in the post-war years, and now the affluent society has ridiculously renovated it with antiseptic-looking interiors and an absurd addition to the attic that bursts through the roof at the back. I wonder who lives there now. A family, no doubt. I wonder if they ever see the ghosts of us, the first occupants, wandered and lost through the rooms at night. I wonder if they witnessed the wars and murders that actually never happened. Or perhaps they see them in their dreams and wonder what nightmares they themselves are waking from. But the house I know is part of myself. It's a particular place at a particular time in my life, and it's as much a part of the fabric in my mind as I am a part of it. Those rooms through which I walk in memory, the stairs I climb, are the rooms in my mind, up above and down below. There are ghosts in that house of dreams. They've given me enough warning now not to pry into their secrets. It would probably kill me as surely as a gunshot if I knew them secrets they have taken with them to the grave. You have been listening to House of Dreams by Turlough Conmee from Weird Tales Told by a Dubliner. If you've enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, share and comment. And so, until next time.